afternoon, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us for this month's edition of Campfire Chats. And it's an auspicious occasion indeed, because we have Ruth MacKenzie on for June, and it's been about a year since we started our Campfire Chats back in June of 2020, when the world was a lot different. Ruth, do you remember that?
I barely remember it, Keith. I mean, it feels like it was just yesterday, but it feels like ages and ages and ages ago. And I don't know, it almost feels like we're returning to the scene of the crime today, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And before I go any further, I actually should introduce myself. My name is Keith Thomson. I'm the director of the Donor Motivation Program in Canada. And for those of you that might not know Ruth, I have no idea how that's possible. Ruth is the CEO of the CAGP. And we initiated this Campfire Chat initiative just a couple of months, 3 months into COVID, because there were so many questions in the not-for-profit sector. I mean, not only about survival, but how could we actually expand our charity initiatives, what worked in the past, will it work currently? Ruth, I think before we get into the meat of the topic, let's talk about our cocktails, because I think one of the most attractive aspects of these campfire chats, besides only being 30 minutes long, is that everyone gets to hear about our favorite cocktail, coffee, or whatever. So I know you've got a special cocktail for today. Could you share with our audience?
I can, for sure. I have with me today a special signature cocktail that I have created just for tonight, and it's a lovely concoction of, I'm not going to lie, vodka, and then some Domaine de Canton ginger liqueur, a little lemon juice, a little ginger syrup, and an egg white, to give it that mouthfeel. It means it's also very, very healthy, Keith, and it works, any time of the day with the egg. It's good for breakfast, or, at this more auspicious cocktail hour. And so yeah, it's just, did I say the name of it? I'm not sure if
I think you have not said the name of it.
It's called Do More Philanthropy, and it's my kind of go-to thing at the end of the week. I've had a tough week, and I maybe log on to the Canada Helps website. I mix myself a DMP. Oh my God, what a coincidence!
Just what a coincidence! To be the same
oh my goodness!
Letters. Wow.
Anyway, and then it's just like, and then I donate to maybe a new charity, maybe a donkey sanctuary or something that's caught my eye that week. So
fair enough. Well, I look forward to imbibing in the DMP, and I appreciate the letters. As for me, I have in my hand what is mostly known as a French 75. Now, a French 75 is a combination of champagne or a bubbly type substance, but mostly an ounce and a half of gin, one half ounce of lemon or lime juice, and a half ounce of simple syrup. And in me, I put sort of a bourbon infused artisanal cherry at the bottom. Very frosty. I frost my glasses up for a half hour before. Yeah. It's called a French 75 because it was invented during the First World War in France, in Paris, named after the artillery gun, the French 75 millimeter artillery gun, because this packs such a punch, it's like getting flattened by a French 75 artillery gun. And I think another name for it might be the CAGP, champagne and gin for philanthropy. So we got the DMP and we have the CAGP. So there you go.
We're drinking for the cause, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Well, cheers, Keith.
Cheers. Cheers. And cheers to everyone who's watching. So now on to the good stuff. I think we could have a very long conversation about what's happened over the last year. From your perspective, Ruth, what would you say you've learned the most in your position as CEO of the CAGP? What's changed the most? What has to change on a go-forward basis? I mean, a big question, but I mean,
oh my God,
a big answer.
That's like 4 questions in one, isn't it, Keith? I mean, you know what, maybe just kind of reflecting back on the last year. I mean, obviously, first of all, thinking internally, I think about our CAGP community and, how grateful I am for that community and how we would have really struggled as an organization if we didn't have our community, our CAGP heroes who stepped up to support us after we canceled our 2020 conference, and all of our donors and supporters and sponsors. You know, we were at a point where, you know, what do we do as an organization? So much of what we do was about high touch contact through education. And, you know, when we couldn't do that anymore. So I also really give a huge shout out to the team at CAGP who were just all in figuring out how we could do this and move forward. But I think, you know, one of the big lessons learned, and for sure this is something that we've known all along, but it really became evident this year, and that's what CAGP has to offer is as relevant, if not more so than it ever was. I mean, first there's our community, that we offer really what is needed, the connection that people get through CAGP. And Keith, right now, in the midst of a pandemic, our membership is the highest it's ever been. I think professionals want to be part of our community because they get so much out of that connection. But it's also what we bring in terms of our mission, that it's so important to charities and advisors, and of course for the donors that we're working with. But also, you know, strategic gift planning by its very nature is somewhat recession proof or crisis proof. And that became really obvious. And actually, we know that in times of crisis, planned gifts can actually increase. And that's because I think it's so long-term and visionary, and it's about future sustainability so much more than just about the here and now. But of course, it's also about current gifts. And I know that, you know, many donors really stepped up this year. I mean, you know, people suffered during the pandemic financially for sure, but a lot of people benefited, and they really stepped up. I mean, almost $500 million through Canada Help in donations this year. And so it was really, I think when we were a year ago talking, we thought, what is going to happen? And didn't really imagine that people were going to step up in the way that they did. So that was a really, I think, really important lesson learned. I think we learned how to communicate really well in a virtual setting. Again, I really credit the CAGP team for that. And I know this isn't supposed to be a big CAGP sell piece, but I truly can't help it. I mean, I believe we bring so much on so many fronts to the broader context of philanthropy and to the broader charitable sector that so many people aren't thinking about, or maybe weren't thinking about before, but it's more on their radar now than it was. We're putting it on their radar, and that's super exciting. I mean, I think in terms of the sector at large, you know, especially it's been really tough, especially for those organizations who rely on fundraising through events or through direct public engagement. Really hard time for sure. But Canada's charities have also really stepped up. They've sacrificed themselves, you know, to you know, support people in need in our communities. They've done that, you know, often without the financial means to do so. And, you know, ultimately it's really demonstrated, I think, that the sector is more needed than ever. I think its nimbleness and its innovative approach, and the passion and commitment of people in the sector has really enabled them to respond in the way government never could. And I think that's recognized by government. And I think government is increasingly seeing the sector as a strategic partner, and also seeing they have a role to play in supporting strong, you know, strong, sustainable communities.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are some of the things that come to mind for me. And I know Serena earlier said, you know, if there's a dog barking in the background, it doesn't really matter, but I'm just going to move my cat. So it's for supper time.
I never heard a cat bark. That's quite original.
Well, I know no, she doesn't bark, but she does crawl all over my desk when it's supper time. So.
Well, appreciating your comments, and from a tactical perspective, from my role as a director of donor motivation program in Canada, as a group with the 15 professionals that we are from coast to coast, we have a pretty unique perspective of what's been working, what hasn't been working over the last year, given that we are currently in a relationship with over 24 charities from Halifax to Victoria. And our observation, and it may not be too profound and may not be new, but oh my gosh, endowment is so much more important today than it was a year ago. I know so many organizations that are barely hanging in there because they had no financial buffer to fall back on. Whereas those organizations that had the foresight to develop an endowment have an insurance policy that is getting
Yeah,
them through pandemic. So kind of obvious, and it puts even more emphasis on plan giving now than in the past. If plan giving wasn't important for you as a charity pre-pandemic, it's critically important on a go forward basis.
absolutely.
And
Yep,
tactically, there's been this huge move to all things digital. And if you were an organization that relied on live fundraising events, well, you've had a bit of a problem.
yeah,
And unfortunately, I know a number of organizations that did, and they didn't really secure the emails, even the phone numbers of their donors. And so it was very hard for them to pivot online. So data is increasingly important in this world, and it's very important in the not-for-profit sector. I mean, we really should know as much as possible about our donors, but at the very least be gathering emails, phone numbers, because on a go-forward basis, we will be raising money. We will be communicating much more online than we ever did pre-pandemic.
absolutely. Yeah,
And there's also been changes as far as the perception of philanthropy, and I think we have to talk about the We scandal over the last year. Do you think that has permanently put a stain on the sector, or do you think this will blow by over time? What's your opinion there, Ruth?
well, I mean, permanent, I don't know, but I don't think it's I don't think it's something that's passing quickly. I think it's something that's super concerning, and I intentionally don't call it the We charity scandal, because I think it's important to try and distance this from the context of charity, because really we as an entity bears little resemblance to much of the rest of the charitable sector. Their size, their complexity, how opaque they seem to operate in terms of their core values as an organization, and even the allegations of dishonesty and lack of transparency with their donors. But I think it's damaging because people see that as charities. That really, I think, seriously erodes the trust in charities significantly. And then I think, on top of it, the other thing that I think is important to talk about is, some of the discussion that's out there now about disbursement quota, because I also think that is something that is a bit of a misnomer, a bit incorrect in some of the messaging that's out there. But I think that it is really eroding trust in charities. And when people hear messages like there are endowments or granting agencies or donor advised funds where there are, massive amounts of dollars that are just sitting there making money and they're not making their way out to charities, that really damages the reputation of charities. And ultimately, it's not really true, or at least we certainly don't know if it's true or not. We certainly know with donor advised funds, it's not. But the broader, how our foundations and grant makers dispersing, I think many of them anecdotally are probably well above the 3.5% threshold. But to even suggest that it must be higher than that suggests to the public that's uneducated on this that that's an issue, even meeting that 3.5% compliance. And that's not at all what this is about. And I think it's really concerning. I've had lots of people say to me, people who aren't really familiar with the sector, that it's so terrible that these charities or grantors are sitting on massive dollars and not even getting 3.5% a year out to the sector and the community. Again, we don't know that, and that's the absolute minimum, and that's a compliance issue. What it is a values-based discussion and a values-based issue. Of course, if they're sitting on massive amounts of endowments, and not ignoring the fact that many endowments are restricted and they actually can't spend down on their core endowment, but this is a values discussion. It's not a compliance discussion. And I think many grant makers are very, very open to getting more money out to the sector. I don't think it has to be about setting a legislative minimum that's higher than 3.5%. There's nothing to say you can't give out more than 3.5%. In many cases, that's happening. But that is a really, in my mind, a very, very concerning message for the public to hear about charities. It's a real, it's really flawed, let's say. And when you take that on the back of the We Charity scandal, you also see the disbursement quota being put in the budget and the consultation and the debate around that happening. That gives it a level of credibility that, in my mind, the data that's presented just doesn't stand up to. It's an emotional argument they're making. And, you know, you've heard me say before, Keith, you don't bring an anecdote to a data fight. It's all about the data, as you say. Where's the evidence to say that that is not happening? And until you can present that evidence, we shouldn't be having the debate.
Yeah, I think it was the famous Canadian management consultant Peter Drucker that said, "In God we trust; all others bring data." And I think much of the criticism around DAFs in Canada come from, how should I say, those individuals who speak with an American accent, which is a very different structure south of the border, especially around disbursements. And in regards to the data, when it comes to independent DAFs, I think investor economics, I know investor economics showed that over 15% is dispersed every year. So if you show the facts, at least on private DAFs or then it's not really an issue. And I can't help but think it's this increasing the disbursement ratio is a solution to a problem that doesn't really exist. But
that's right.
The media, in much the same way the media focus on overhead in the charitable sector, they're focusing on this perception, this negative, which is a real problem, especially since, bar none, DAFs are the fastest growing philanthropic vehicle in Canada. And my feeling is that if you know, you got to get on the DAF train. If your organization doesn't have one, you should set one up so your donors have the option of contributing large dollars to your own DAF that then they can disperse as they see fit.
That's right. And it's just such a a great opportunity to, well, first of all, it addresses for donors when they may find themselves in a position of a big tax bill for whatever. They've had a big economic event in their life. They're not ready to even think about what they want to do with that, philanthropically speaking, in order to be able to realize some tax advantage. So donor advised fund is a great way to, buy them some time on that front, but it's also an incredibly valuable way to open up the conversation of philanthropy within your family and teach your children about charitable giving and passing on those values in a really compelling way. And, people who have a donor advised fund and engage their kids, even when they're young, about what are the charities that we want to support? What is it that you want to support and is meaningful for you? I just think it's such an incredible mechanism to build and strengthen philanthropy into the future. So it is, again, just super concerning that the level of discourse that this DQ debate is getting. We are exploring it at CAGP, and I think our Government Relations Committee at our last meeting, we're really keen about developing a position paper so that we can weigh in a way that's meaningful and presents a reasonable argument that's fact-based and data-based for this debate. So, we look forward to that, working on that over the summer and getting that out in the fall and really engaging with the sector on that front.
Yeah, we could spend hours on the DAF conversation. Suffice us to say, on July 15th, the next Campfire chat we're having, Janine Purvis is going to be talking to a client of hers, Bradley Lennon, who has some very interesting things to say, or will have some very interesting things about family philanthropy and why he and his family chose a DAF. I very much encourage you, if you want to continue to hear about the dialogue, the conversation, that you should sign up for the July 15th Campfire chat.
Yeah.
Now, one initiative that we have to touch upon that's been hugely successful, much more so than we ever anticipated before it was initiated, was the Willpower campaign. Can you share updated information of how successful it is, and why do you think it's so exceeding the expectations that we had for the campaign, Ruth?
Well, I mean, I think there's a few reasons for that. I mean, one, the thing that is so beautiful about the Willpower campaign is that it's such a beautiful, crisp, clear message. We want people to leave more gifts to charities in their will. And so from a marketing and public education perspective, a really simple, clear message that's easy to wrap your head around. And right out of the gate, we've addressed the big concern that people have, which is about, I want to leave money to my family. And we're showing them you actually can do that, but also leave money to a cause that you care about. And I think building on that, we have created such fantastic images and a look and feel for the campaign. Just the name of the campaign is really, really compelling. But when you look at the numbers behind the campaign as well, and I think you know, and many of your the people with us tonight probably know that this is emulating the Remember a Charity campaign out of the UK. And you know, here in Canada, we benchmarked where we're at in terms of legacy giving. We're at about 5%. Our aim with the campaign over 10 years is to move the bar up to 8.5%. That's going to mean an extra $40 billion to the charity. So those numbers are staggering and eye-opening. But I think, you know, we rolled it out in the Niagara Golden Horseshoe region around the GTA last fall. Super, super successful in terms of the impressions, which is really important about building brand profile. But I think, you know, the pandemic was really shining a spotlight on people thinking about their mortality and thinking about their estates and wanting to be prepared. And also, I think the campaign presents an image to look inward and think about your legacy and the meaning that you want to have in your life. And, you know, the lineup of all of these things made the message of the campaign resonate so perfectly right now. It was an important message at this specific time. And so we made the decision to go out pan-Canadian in 2021 versus a slightly expanded pilot in a few cities. And you know, I'm going to be meeting with Lori Fox tomorrow. She's coming to our board meeting and is going to share the stats on the number of charities and advisors signed up for the campaign. I know we had to like end it and start collecting names on a wait list for people or charities that want to be involved next year. So it really did exceed our expectations in terms of how many charities and partners would step up and be part of the campaign this year. So it's super, super exciting. And it launched officially publicly in early June. And then actually yesterday and today, we did our training for our partners, for our charity partners and our advisor partners. And I mean, Donor Motivation Program has stepped up to support this campaign. You got behind it. So I think, you know, I'm speaking to the converted here in many ways, that I think it's just it's timeliness of the campaign. And then I think people really are impressed by the potential impact of the campaign. And it's also about bringing people on a journey. It's, you know, it's using nudge theory, it's using behavior change initiatives and tactics to move people from awareness all the way to taking action. So I think that's part of why it has been and it's going to be so successful. It's really, really exciting for CAGP because it's so on mission for us.
Yeah, it isn't so on mission. I was talking to a donor yesterday, and she had just included charity in her estate plans, and she was very surprised to learn that she was only one of 5% of Canadians that actually have included charity in their will. And what's fascinating and what the surveys show is that I think the main reason why donors haven't considered including charity in their will is no one's really actually asked them. That just the simple motion of asking would go so far. So I'm looking forward to being involved, and DMP is so much looking forward to being involved, because we're all about, we sponsor the education. We're an education sponsor of the conference because we feel it's so important to educate our fellow charity professionals, but we sponsor Willpower because we feel it's so important to educate Canadians about the power of making a meaningful difference in the world through their estate. So to your point, I think CAGP is like right on, trend on, and capturing the thoughts of our donors from coast to coast. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this is going to play out. I think it's going to be even vastly more successful than our than our expectations. So
Fingers
fantastic.
crossed for sure.
Now,
Yeah.
one thing I have to ask as we wind down the last 5 minutes, there's been understandably a much greater emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion in not only in the not-for-profit sector, but in society overall, especially as we look what's happened south of the border, Black Lives Matter. Any comments on how this trend, and it's really a strong trend, is impacting the not-for-profit sector here in Canada, Ruth?
Well, I mean, I think it's, a pervasive topic across the sector, and I think charities and those in the sector who aren't getting behind this are getting called out. We do not have a very diverse sector, and I can tell you we can do a lot better at CAGP around this. We need to have a more diverse audience. We need to do a lot better job at applying a diversity lens to the work that we do. And I would say we can say that's pretty pervasive across the sector. We need to be proactive in increasing our own diversity to make sure that we have a variety of voices around the table. It's not just the right thing to do, it's because this is the best thing for us to ensure that we're inclusive and are speaking to the broadest possible audience we can. And, as you know, we explored this at our conference, Keith, and it was, hugely, went down really well with the delegates at the conference. Big support for CAGP leaning into this, both internally, but also on a leadership perspective, because I think what's really important is that means examining philanthropy itself. It's not just, how diverse is your board of directors and how diverse are your presenters at your conference, but how does philanthropy perpetuate exclusion and marginalization? I think there's lots of evidence out there now that grant makers are not granting with equity in the sector. BIPOC led and BIPOC serving organizations receive a fraction of the funding that other charities and others doing good work in the community do. And I think we're being called out on it, and rightly so. And I think, we need to look at how philanthropy perpetuates that. And, CAGP has been out front of this. You may recall that at our 2020 conference, may it rest in peace, our Frank debate was going to focus on just that, debating the question, has philanthropy become a barrier to social good? Actually, Serena was going to be one of our debaters arguing against that question, but it's an important debate to have. These are big issues and transformative issues, and it's getting even more so, especially as we in Canada, we're in the midst of our own George Floyd moment right now, that being the recent discovery in Kamloops and the subsequent discovery in Brandon, Manitoba, of a mass grave, which unfortunately, unless you're listening to the Aboriginal People's Television Network, you probably haven't heard of. But it's not only the Catholic Church and it's not only the government that needs to be examining their complicity in their actions, but all of us, and how that relates to reconciliation. We all need to step up and do this. And I know these are hard conversations, but they're critically important conversations to have. And I know I look forward to CAGP stepping up and being part of that conversation, and learning along the way too, right? Because we've got to learn as well. So
absolutely.
Thank you for asking that.
No, I really appreciate your comments, Ruth, and I think this is an opportunity for the CAGP and the not-for-profit sector to lead Canadian society in this dialogue and in this conversation, because I think we have the right people involved that could really move the dial here. So I think that might be a wonderful way to wrap up. It's 5:29 by my clock. I could speak with you and your cat and your donkey for hours, but unfortunately we don't have hours. So Ruth, I'd like to thank you so much for coming on board the second time for our newly renewed Campfire Chats over the next year. Again, I would be remiss if I didn't mention on July 15th, Janine Purvis our donor motivation program professional in the Greater Toronto area, will be having a conversation with a gentleman by the name of Bradley Lennon. Bradley is a retired donor, very thoughtful individual, wanted a lot of answers to questions around philanthropy before he decided to give. And he'll share why and the how he gave next month, and why and how he set up a donor advised fund, because he felt that this was one of the most effective initiatives to multiply his philanthropic impact. So don't forget to sign up. We look forward to seeing you then. Ruth, thanks again so much. And for everyone else that jumped on today, really appreciate your time. It's a beautiful day here in Toronto. I'm sure it's nice in Ottawa. You had other options. We appreciate you being with us. Take care, everyone. Stay well.
Thank you, Keith. Thanks for having me. It's been so fun.
You're welcome, Ruth. Take care.